The divorce papers felt like ice against Isabella's fingertips, a stark contrast to the gentle warmth of the life growing inside her. Just hours ago, she had been planning a nursery. Now she was being discarded. Ethan, her husband of 5 years, the man who had vowed to cherish her, stood by the marble fireplace, his expression unreadable. Chloe offers me a future, Izzy, a life without complications. The word complications hung in the air, a cruel euphemism for their unborn child. He was choosing his mistress, leaving Isabella pregnant and alone. Little did he know, the woman he was abandoning was no damsel in distress. She was the sole heiress to the Valeriano casino dynasty, and the storm she was about to unleash would bring his gilded world crashing down. The scent of rain-soaked asphalt and old money clung to the air in their corner of Pacific Heights. From the bay window of their 3-story Victorian, Isabella watched the fog roll in, a familiar gray shroud that seemed to mirror the creeping chill in her own life. Their home, a masterpiece of restored architecture that Ethan had proudly pointed out in an issue of Architectural Digest, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a beautifully appointed museum of a life she was no longer sure was hers. Ethan found her there, his reflection appearing in the glass before she heard his footsteps on the polished oak. He was a man carved from ambition, his jawline sharp, his smile a carefully calibrated tool he wielded with practiced ease. He'd built a boutique investment firm from the ground up, a testament to his relentless drive. When they met, she had been captivated by that fire, by the way he looked at her as if she were the final, most precious acquisition in his collection. "Still staring at the fog, Izzy?" he asked, his voice smooth as the aged whiskey he favored. He placed a hand on her shoulder, but the touch felt distant, a gesture performed out of habit rather than affection. Isabella forced a smile, turning from the window. "Just thinking. The doctor's appointment went well today." She placed a hand over the slight, still subtle swell of her stomach. The heartbeat was so strong, Ethan, like a tiny hummingbird. A flicker of something, was it panic, crossed his face before it was replaced by his usual charming mask. "That's great. Really great." He moved away, loosening his tie as he walked toward the bar cart, a gleaming Art Deco piece he'd won at a charity auction. "Listen, about tonight, something's come up with the Mercer account. I'm going to have to work late." The excuse was so worn, so thin, it was almost transparent. It had been the Mercer account last week, and a conference call with Hong Kong the week before. His nights grew longer, his excuses more elaborate, while the space between them and their king-sized bed yawned like a chasm. She had tried to ignore it, attributing his distance to the pressures of his work, the stress of impending fatherhood. She had decorated the nursery in shades of soft sage and cream, bought a ridiculously expensive cashmere baby blanket, and read books on gentle parenting, all in a desperate attempt to build a bridge back to him. "Oh," she said, her voice small. "Okay, I was going to make that pasta you like, the one with the truffle cream sauce. Save me some," he said, not looking at her as he poured himself a drink. The clink of ice against crystal was the only sound in the room for a long moment. Isabella watched him, a knot of dread tightening in her chest. She remembered the early days, the whirlwind romance. He had pursued her with a single-minded intensity that had been both flattering and overwhelming. He loved her quiet nature, her background as a freelance art restorer, a skill she'd learned from her grandfather. He called her his old soul, his calm in the storm. He hadn't asked much about her family, and she hadn't offered. "They're private people," she'd said, a half-truth that seemed to satisfy him. Her past was a locked room, and he, a man obsessed with the future, had never bothered to ask for the key. He saw her simply as Isabella Rossi, a woman with impeccable taste and a gentle spirit, the perfect wife to complete the portrait of his success. The truth was far more complex. The name she carried was a shield, a deliberate separation from the one she'd been born with, Valeriano. The Valeriano name was synonymous with the neon glow of Las Vegas, the clatter of poker chips, and the kind of wealth that was both dazzling and dangerous. Her grandfather, Niccolo Valeriano, had built an empire from a single blackjack table, a sprawling dynasty of casinos and hotels known as the Seraphim Group. Isabella had fled that world at 18, craving anonymity, a life built on her own terms, not on a legacy of high-stakes gambling and backroom deals. She had met Ethan a few years later, and in him, she thought she'd found her escape, her normal. Now, that illusion was shattering. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "We need to talk. Something's wrong. I can feel it." He downed his whiskey in one swallow, the movement sharp and decisive. He set the glass down with a heavy thud and finally met her eyes. The warmth was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve that terrified her. "You're right," he said. "We do need to talk." He didn't sit. He stood by the fireplace, one hand resting on the marble mantelpiece, positioning himself as if he were addressing a boardroom, not his pregnant wife. "I'm not happy, Isabella. I haven't been for a long time." Each word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall between them. "What are you talking about? We're having a baby. We're supposed to be a family." "That's just it," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "This baby, it changes everything. The timing is all wrong. My business is at a critical stage. I need to be focused, agile. A child. It's a complication I can't afford right now." The word hit her like a physical blow. Complication. Their child, the tiny life she was nurturing, was a line item on his balance sheet, a liability. "How can you say that?" she whispered, tears blurring his cruel, handsome face. "Because it's the truth," he said, his gaze unwavering. "And there's something else. Someone else." He said the name without hesitation, as if it had been resting on his tongue for weeks. "Chloe." Chloe. The name was vaguely familiar. A junior associate at his firm? No, a client's daughter. A socialite she'd seen photographed at charity galas, always draped in diamonds and a predatory smile. "She understands my world, Izzy. She's part of it. The ambition, the drive. We're aligned." He took a deep breath, the final, fatal plunge. "I'm leaving you. My lawyer will be in touch tomorrow with the papers." The room tilted. The beautiful objects, the curated art, the sweeping view of the bay, it all swam in a nauseating blur. She clutched her stomach, a primal, protective instinct. "I'm pregnant, Ethan. With your child. I'll provide for you, of course," he said, the offer as insulting as the betrayal itself. "You and the complication will be well taken care of. A generous settlement. You won't have to worry about anything." He thought it was about money. He was trying to buy his freedom, to settle his conscience with a wire transfer. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. He had no idea who he was talking to, what power she could wield if she chose to. But in that moment, she wasn't an heiress. She was just a woman whose heart was being systematically dismantled by the man she loved. "Get out," she choked out, the words raw and broken. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his features. He had expected tears, pleading, perhaps even hysterics. He had not expected this quiet, cold fury. "Izzy, get out of my house." He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded curtly. He turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing on the oak floors, each one a final, definitive goodbye. Isabella stood frozen, listening until the sound of the heavy front door closing sealed the silence. The gilded cage had broken open, and she was in a freefall. The silence Ethan left behind was a living entity. It filled the cavernous rooms of the Victorian, seeped into the expensive upholstery, and mocked her from every polished surface. For the first 24 hours, Isabella did not move from the living room. She sat on the cream-colored sofa, a relic from a life that now felt like a fiction, and watched the city lights blink on through the bay window as night fell. The divorce papers had arrived that morning, delivered by a cold-faced courier, their clinical language a brutal counterpoint to the storm of grief raging inside her. Irreconcilable differences. The phrase was a lie. Their differences had been reconciled, smoothed over, and hidden beneath a veneer of domestic bliss for years. The real reason was sitting in a folder on the coffee table, a prenuptial agreement, drafted by Ethan's formidable legal team 5 years ago. She had signed it without a second thought, blinded by love and a naive belief in forever. It was ironclad, designed to protect his burgeoning empire. It stipulated a one-time payout, a generous sum that, to him, was a rounding error, but to the world would seem like a fortune. It was hush money, go-away money, It was an insult wrapped in six figures. Her phone buzzed incessantly. Her friends, Ethan's friends really, were sending texts. Concerned at first. "Is everything okay? Haven't heard from you." Then as the news, undoubtedly leaked by Ethan's camp, began to circulate, the tone shifted. Pitying. Awkward. "Thinking of you. So sorry to hear what happened." They were choosing sides, and she was on the losing one. On the second day, a wave of nausea, sharper and more insistent than the usual morning sickness, forced her to her feet. As she retched into the cold porcelain of a guest bathroom toilet, a fierce, protective anger began to burn through the fog of her sorrow. It wasn't just her he had abandoned, it was their child, her baby, and she would not let them be a casualty of his ambition. She walked through the house, her house, and saw it for what it was, a stage set for his life. Every painting, every sculpture, every book on the shelves had been chosen to project an image of cultured success. Her own contributions, the subtle touches of warmth and personality, seemed to have been swallowed whole. In the nursery, the serene sage-green walls felt like a mockery. She ran her hand over the empty crib, her heart aching with a pain so profound it stole her breath. This was a dream he had allowed her to build. Knowing all along he was going to tear it down, that was when she made the call. She scrolled through her contacts past the numbers of florists, caterers, and the society wives she lunched with, until she found a name she hadn't dialed in 5 years. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar, gravelly voice answered. "Isabella?" The voice was laced with surprise and a guarded warmth. There was no preamble, no small talk. With him, there never was. "Grandfather," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I need to come home." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence heavy with unspoken questions and years of distance. She had left his world, rejected the Valeriano legacy, and he had let her go. Niccolo Valeriano was not a man who pleaded. He ruled his empire from a penthouse suite atop the Seraphim Grand in Las Vegas, a kingdom of glass and light. He was a patriarch from another era, a man of immense power, fierce loyalty, and unforgiving principles. She had broken his heart when she left, and in turn, she had broken her own. "The jet will be at the Oakland private airfield in 3 hours, he said, his tone decisive, leaving no room for argument. "A car will be at your door in 30 minutes. Pack what you need." "Grandfather, she started, unsure of what to say. "I'm sorry, I was wrong. I'm pregnant. I'm lost." "We will talk when you are here, mia cara," he said gently, the Italian endearment a balm on her raw nerves. "Just come home." The line went dead. Isabella felt a tremor of fear mixed with an overwhelming sense of relief. She was running from one gilded cage straight into another, but this one at least was her own. The car, a discreet black town car with tinted windows, arrived precisely 30 minutes later. The driver, a man built like a mountain with a kind face named Leo, had worked for her grandfather for as long as she could remember. He took her single suitcase without a word, his presence a silent promise of safety. As she walked out of the Victorian for the last time, she left the key on the hall table, next to the folder containing the divorce papers. She didn't take a final look back. The house, the life, the man. They were already part of a past she had to survive. The flight to Las Vegas was a surreal transition. The gray, foggy skies of San Francisco gave way to the harsh, clear sunlight of the Mojave Desert. As the plane descended, the city appeared like a mirage, a sprawling oasis of impossible architecture and shimmering light. This was the world she had run from, a world of calculated risk and high reward, of dazzling facades and hidden depths. The Seraphim Grand towered over the Strip, its curved glass exterior reflecting the desert sky. Her grandfather's penthouse was the entire top floor, a private kingdom with 360-degree views of the city he had built. When the private elevator doors opened, he was there, waiting. Niccolo Valeriano was 80 years old, but he carried himself with the unyielding authority of a man half his age. His silver hair was impeccably groomed, his dark eyes sharp and intelligent, missing nothing. He was dressed in a tailored suit, a stark contrast to the casual wealth of Ethan's world. This was old power, a different species of influence altogether. He opened his arms and Isabella fell into them, the sobs she had been holding back for days finally breaking free. He held her, his hand gently stroking her hair, letting her cry until the storm passed. He smelled of cigars and bay rum, the scent of her childhood. "He is a fool, Isabella," Niccolo said, his voice a low rumble. "A blind, arrogant fool." He led her to a plush sofa overlooking the glittering expanse of the city. He had already been briefed. Her grandfather had eyes and ears everywhere. He knew of Ethan's betrayal, of the pregnancy, of the insulting settlement. "He does not know who you are," Niccolo stated, pouring her a glass of water with a steady hand. "No," Isabella admitted, her voice hoarse. "I wanted a normal life. I didn't want the name, all of this." She gestured vaguely at the opulent room, at the city below. "There is no such thing as a normal life," her grandfather said, his expression grim. "There is only the life you are given and the one you have the strength to claim. You are a Valeriano. You have the blood of kings and gamblers in your veins. You have forgotten this. It is time for you to remember." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "This boy, this Ethan, he has tried to discard you. He thinks he can throw away my granddaughter, my blood, and the mother of my great-grandchild like she is nothing." A dangerous light glinted in his eyes. He is about to learn that when you bet against the house of Valeriano, the house always wins. His words sent a shiver down her spine. It was not just a promise of support, it was a declaration of war. And for the first time since the world had fallen out from under her, Isabella felt a flicker of something other than pain. It was a cold, hard spark of Valeriano fire. Ethan felt a profound sense of liberation. Driving his Aston Martin down the Pacific Coast Highway, the top down and the salty air whipping through his hair, he felt like a man unshackled. Chloe sat beside him, her laughter as bright and carefree as the California sun. She was everything Isabella wasn't: effervescent, spontaneous, and unapologetically ambitious. Her father, a titan of the tech industry, was exactly the kind of connection Ethan needed to elevate his firm from successful to legendary. Their affair had started 6 months ago, a slow burn of flirtatious glances over business dinners and lingering touches that escalated into clandestine meetings in boutique hotels. Chloe was a thrill, a conquest. She saw the world as he did, a series of strategic moves, of calculated risks for maximum reward. She didn't talk about nurseries or feelings. She talked about IPOs and market disruption. She was a partner, not a dependent. "Happy, darling?" she purred, leaning over to kiss his cheek. Her perfume, expensive and intoxicating, filled the car. "Happier than I've been in a long time," he answered, and he believed it. The guilt over Isabella was a dull ache, easily ignored. He'd done the honorable thing, he told himself. He hadn't dragged it out. He'd been clean, decisive. The settlement was more than fair. It would set her up for life. She was a simple woman with simple needs. She would cry for a while. Then she would take the money and build a quiet, unassuming life for herself and the child. He winced internally at the thought. The pregnancy had been the catalyst, the final terrifying proof that the life he was building with Isabella was a cage, one of soft cushions and domestic obligations, but a cage nonetheless. He was destined for more than PTA meetings and suburban barbecues. They spent the weekend at a lavish resort in Big Sur, a place where privacy was the ultimate luxury. Their bungalow overlooked the ocean, and they made love with a desperate, frantic energy, as if to physically erase the memory of the life he'd just left behind. He showered Chloe with gifts, a diamond tennis bracelet, a vintage bottle of champagne, tokens of his newfound freedom. "My father's so excited to have you officially in the family," Chloe said one evening as they dined on the terrace, the sunset painting the sky in fiery hues. "He's been talking about the potential for a strategic partnership between his venture capital fund and your firm." This was it, the jackpot. An alliance with Chloe's father would give him access to a level of capital and influence he had only dreamed of. All his years of grinding, of ruthless networking and 80-hour work weeks were about to pay off. The sacrifice of his marriage felt not just necessary, but prudent, a sound business decision. When he returned to the city on Monday morning, he felt like a king. He walked into his office, a sleek modern space of glass and steel overlooking the financial district, ready to conquer the world. His assistant, a sharp young woman named Maya, handed him his messages with her usual efficiency. "Your lawyer called, Mr. Hayes. He said, Mrs. Hayes, Isabella, has not responded to the settlement offer. The papers were left at the house. Ethan frowned. Fine. She's probably just being emotional. Give her a few days. She'll come around. He dismissed the thought, turning his attention to the markets. But as the week wore on, a strange disquiet began to settle over him. Isabella's silence was unnerving. He had expected a fight, tears, angry phone calls. He had prepared himself for a messy, emotional battle. This complete and utter absence was something else entirely. He called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. He told himself it was for the best, a clean break. The first crack in his perfect new world appeared on Thursday. He had a meeting with Marcus Thorne, a conservative, old-money investor whose backing had given Ethan's firm its initial stamp of legitimacy. Ethan, Marcus said, his tone unusually cool as they sat in his stuffy, wood-paneled office. I heard about you and Isabella. A shame. She's a lovely girl, very classy. It was a difficult decision, Marcus. But for the best, Ethan said, trying to steer the conversation back to business. Is it true what they're saying? That she's pregnant? Marcus asked, his eyes sharp and judgmental. Ethan felt a flush of anger. That's a private matter. Not when it affects business, Marcus retorted. Reputation is everything in our world, son. A man who leaves his pregnant wife for a younger woman, it's not a good look. It suggests a certain instability, a lack of character. He steepled his fingers. Thorne Consolidated is pulling its portfolio from your firm. We'll be transferring the assets by the end of the month. Ethan was stunned. Thorne's investment was a cornerstone of his firm. Marcus, you can't be serious. My personal life has no bearing on my ability to manage your money. On the contrary, Marcus said, standing to signal the end of the meeting. It has every bearing on my trust in you as a man, and I don't do business with men I don't trust. The news of Thorne's withdrawal sent a ripple of panic through the office. It was a vote of no confidence from a major player. Other clients started calling, asking pointed questions. His carefully constructed reputation was beginning to fray at the edges. He confronted Chloe that night in her minimalist, white-on-white apartment. Did you tell people Isabella was pregnant? He demanded, his voice tight with frustration. Chloe was examining her nails, looking bored. It must have slipped out. People were asking why you left her. It's the truth, isn't it? The truth is that it's tanking my business. Marcus Thorne just pulled out. He said I had a lack of character. She finally looked at him, her expression hardening. Don't be so dramatic, Ethan. It's one old dinosaur. My father's investment will more than make up for it. You need to stop worrying about your pathetic little ex-wife and focus on the future. Our future. Her words, meant to be reassuring, felt cold and dismissive. Pathetic little ex-wife. Was that how he saw Isabella now? The thought was unsettling. He remembered her gentle kindness, the way she could calm his anxieties with a simple touch, the quiet strength he had mistaken for weakness. A few days later, a second, more powerful tremor shook his world. He received a call from his contact at a major financial blog, a journalist he occasionally fed scoops to. Ethan, buddy, I'm calling as a courtesy, the journalist said, his voice buzzing with excitement. We're running a story tomorrow. It's big. You might want to prepare a statement. What story? Ethan asked, a sense of dread coiling in his stomach. Your ex-wife, Isabella Rossi. Turns out that's not her real name, or not her full name, anyway. There was a pause for dramatic effect. Her name is Isabella Valeriano Rossi, as in Niccolo Valeriano of the Seraphim Group. She's his only grandchild, his sole heir. The phone slipped from Ethan's hand, clattering onto his expensive mahogany desk. Valeriano. The name was whispered with a mixture of fear and awe on Wall Street. The Seraphim Group was a private behemoth, an empire of casinos, real estate, and private equity with a valuation so high it was almost mythical. They were notoriously private, ruthless in business, and fiercely protective of their own. Isabella, his quiet, unassuming Izzy. The art restorer, who claimed to have a private family, was the heiress to one of the largest fortunes in the country. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just that he had been deceived. It was the sheer scale of his own ignorance. He had looked at a queen and seen only a pawn. He had abandoned her. He had called her child a complication. He had offered her a settlement that was, to her, probably the equivalent of pocket change. He hadn't just divorced his wife. He had insulted the house of Valeriano. And now they knew. The silence from her end suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. It wasn't the silence of a victim. It was the silence of a predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Mojave heat was a dry, searing force, a stark contrast to the climate-controlled chill of the Seraphim Grand. For the first week, Isabella felt as if she were surfacing from a deep dive, gasping for air in a world that was both foreign and achingly familiar. She slept in her old girlhood bedroom, a suite of rooms decorated in shades of cream and gold, with a balcony that overlooked the pulsing, neon heart of Las Vegas. The city she had once seen as a prison now felt like a fortress. Her grandfather gave her space. He was a master of patience, a trait he'd honed over decades of high-stakes poker. He let her grieve, let her sleep, and ensured a steady stream of her favorite foods appeared without her having to ask. But beneath his quiet attentiveness, she could feel him watching, waiting. One evening, he found her in the vast two-story library, a room paneled in dark wood and filled with rare first editions. She was running her hand over the binding of a book on Renaissance art, a relic of the life she'd tried to build for herself. "Your mother loved this room," Niccolo said, his voice soft. He walked over to a portrait that hung above the fireplace, a beautiful, dark-haired woman with Isabella's eyes and a sad, knowing smile. Sofia Valeriano Rossi. She had died when Isabella was 12, a tragedy that had shattered their small family and solidified Niccolo's overprotective grip on his only grandchild. "She would have hated what I let happen to me," Isabella said, her voice barely a whisper. "No," Niccolo corrected gently. "She would have hated that you forgot who you were. You are her daughter. You are my heir. That is not a burden, Isabella. It is a source of strength." He gestured for her to sit, taking the armchair opposite her. "I did you a disservice when I let you run away. I thought I was giving you freedom. Instead, I let you walk into the world unarmed. I wanted to be normal," she confessed. "I didn't want to be the Valeriano heiress. I wanted someone to love me for me, not for my name. And you found a man who loved you for what he thought you were. A beautiful, docile accessory with no threatening connections," Niccolo said bluntly. "A man who saw your kindness as weakness and your independence as a liability. He did not love you, mia cara. He loved the idea of you, an object he could possess." His words were harsh, but they rang with undeniable truth. Ethan had never truly seen her. He had seen a reflection of his own ambitions. "What he has done is an act of war against this family," Niccolo continued, his voice hardening. "The disrespect is profound, but how we respond is up to you. I will burn his world to the ground if you ask it of me. But there is another way, a better way." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "Power is not about destruction, Isabella. It is about control. It is about seeing the whole board, understanding your opponent's weaknesses, and making them play your game. Your husband is a man built on image and perception. His entire empire is a house of cards built on the trust of others. We will not blow it down. We will simply remove the card that holds it all up." A new fire began to smolder within Isabella. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in her heart, but now it was accompanied by a cold, clear-eyed anger. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to learn the business," he said. "Our business. You have a brilliant mind, a gift for seeing the details others miss. I saw it in you when you were just a girl, studying the brushstrokes on a canvas. The casino floor is no different. It is a world of strategy, psychology, and calculated risk. It is time you took your seat at the table." The next day, her education began. It was not a series of boring boardroom meetings, but a master class in power, taught by the Grand Master himself. Niccolo walked her through the heart of the Seraphim Grand, not as a guest, but as its future queen. He showed her the intricate web of surveillance, the eye in the sky, where analysts monitored every table, every player, looking for cheats, high rollers, and tells. "Every person who walks through these doors is telling a story," Niccolo explained, his voice echoing in the quiet, high-tech command center. "Their posture, their bets, the sweat on their brow. The trick is to learn how to read them. Your husband, for example, he projects confidence, but he is terrified of losing control. He craves legitimacy, the approval of old money. That is his weakness." She met with the heads of the Valeriano Empire. There was Marco, the stoic head of security, who had been her father's best friend. There was Lena, the sharp, impeccably dressed CFO, who could dissect a balance sheet with surgical precision. They treated her with a deferential respect that was initially jarring. They weren't seeing Isabella Rossi, the spurned wife. They were seeing Isabella Valeriano, the future of the dynasty. Slowly, something inside her began to shift. The world of art restoration, a world of quiet contemplation and patient work, had taught her focus. Her grandfather was right. The skills were transferable. She began to see the patterns, the flow of money and power, the intricate dance of risk and reward that underpinned the entire operation. She started attending morning briefings, initially as a silent observer, then asking sharp, insightful questions that earned her nods of approval from Lena and Marco. The news of her identity broke on a Wednesday, exactly as her grandfather had predicted. It wasn't a leak, it was a carefully orchestrated press release from the Seraphim Group announcing that Ms. Isabella Valeriano Rossi, sole heir to the Valeriano fortune, was taking an active role in the family business, starting with the oversight of the group's substantial real estate and investment portfolios. The announcement was accompanied by a single stunning photograph of her, taken a few days prior. She stood on the balcony of the penthouse, the lights of Vegas glittering behind her. She was not smiling. Her expression was one of cool, formidable composure. The vulnerable wife was gone. In her place stood a queen. The story exploded. Financial blogs, gossip columns, and mainstream news outlets picked it up immediately. Millionaire mogul's ex-wife revealed as secret casino heiress. The ultimate revenge story, how Isabella Valeriano is poised to take over Las Vegas. Her phone, which had been silent for weeks, lit up with calls and texts from the very people who had abandoned her. The society wives, the fair-weather friends, all scrambling to get back in her orbit. She ignored them all. Later that day, her grandfather handed her a tablet. It was open to a live feed of the stock market. "Watch," he said. She saw the ticker for Ethan's firm, Hayes Capital. Hayes. A cascade of red numbers flowed next to it. It was plummeting. Marcus Thorne pulling out was a tremor, Niccolo explained, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "This is the earthquake. Our announcement, coupled with the news of your pregnancy and his infidelity, has painted him as a fool at best and a predator at worst. He built his reputation on being a savvy judge of value, and it turns out he couldn't recognize the single most valuable asset in his own home. No one will trust his judgment now. His investors are abandoning him in droves." Isabella watched the numbers fall, a dizzying descent into ruin. She felt a cold knot of satisfaction, but it was not triumphant. It was the somber, righteous feeling of a debt being paid. She had not sought this. She had not asked for this war. But she was a Valeriano, and she would not lose. She was no longer just a woman scorned. She was the queen of spades, and she was about to play her hand. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Ethan felt like he was standing in the epicenter of a controlled demolition, one he had unwittingly triggered. His phone didn't stop ringing, a cacophony of panicked investors, furious clients, and opportunistic journalists. The headline from the Wall Street Journal was seared into his brain: "The billion-dollar blind spot, how Ethan Hayes fumbled an empire." He was a laughingstock. The man who prided himself on his foresight, on his ability to spot a winning investment before anyone else, had been living with the heiress to the Valeriano fortune and had been completely oblivious. The narrative was brutal and universal. He was an idiot, a greedy, short-sighted fool who had traded a queen for a jack. His office, once a symbol of his ascent, became a bunker. He barked orders at his staff, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a raw, frantic paranoia. "Get our PR team on the phone. I want a statement out now. No comment on my personal life. Emphasize the firm's strong fundamentals." But there were no strong fundamentals left. The firm's value was intrinsically tied to his reputation, and his reputation was in ashes. By noon, Hayes had lost 40% of its value. Margin calls were coming in, and the liquidity he thought he had was evaporating. Chloe's reaction was a study in self-preservation. She arrived at his office not with words of comfort, but with an icy fury. "You have made me look like a fool, Ethan," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. She threw a copy of a gossip magazine onto his desk. The cover featured a picture of her and Ethan, smiling on their Big Sur getaway, next to the regal, powerful photo of Isabella. The headline read, "The Mistress versus the Heiress." "You told me she was nobody," Chloe continued, her face contorted with rage. "A quiet little artist with no family to speak of. You didn't think to mention she was practically royalty in the business world?" "I didn't know," he yelled back, the frustration and panic boiling over. "How could I have known? She never said a word." "Oh, so this is her fault now?" Chloe laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "You were married to her for 5 years, and you couldn't be bothered to learn the first thing about her family? My father is furious. He called me this morning. The partnership is off. He said, and I quote, 'I don't invest with men who have such catastrophic lapses in judgment.' He thinks you're a liability." The final pillar of his new life crumbled. The strategic alliance with her father, the very reason he had justified his betrayal, was gone. He had blown up his life for nothing. "So that's it?" he asked, his voice hollow. "You're just leaving?" "What did you expect?" she scoffed, grabbing her designer handbag from the chair. "That I would stand by you while you sink? I'm not your sad, pathetic little Isabella. I don't do sinking ships." She paused at the door, turning to deliver the final blow. "And to think I actually thought you were smart. Turns out you were just lucky, and your luck just ran out." The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Ethan in a silence that was more damning than her yelling. He was alone, utterly and completely alone. The next few weeks were a blur of damage control and desperate maneuvers. He tried to secure a line of credit to stop the bleeding, but the banks wouldn't touch him. He tried to reassure his remaining clients, but his words sounded hollow even to himself. The story had taken on a life of its own, a modern-day morality play where he was the villain. Every article, every blog post rehashed the same damning details: the pregnancy, the affair, the insulting settlement offer. That detail, in particular, seemed to fascinate the public. The idea that he had tried to pay off a multi-billion-dollar heiress with a check that wouldn't even cover her jewelry budget. It made him look not just cruel, but comically out of his depth. He started drinking heavily, the expensive whiskey he once savored now a tool for oblivion. He'd sit in his empty, silent apartment. He'd sold the Victorian in the divorce, a transaction Isabella's lawyers had handled with ruthless efficiency, and stare at the picture of her that was now everywhere. It wasn't the soft, gentle Izzy he remembered. This woman was a stranger. Her eyes held a formidable intelligence and a strength he had never recognized. Had it always been there, hidden in plain sight? Or had he created this woman with his betrayal? One night in a drunken haze, he called her. He didn't know what he would say, but he felt a desperate, primal need to connect with her, the one person who had truly known him. The call went to voicemail. Her voice, calm and professional, instructed the caller to leave a message for Miss Valeriano Rossi. He hung up without speaking. His downfall was swift and methodical. It wasn't a loud, explosive crash, but a quiet, systematic dismantling. A major real estate developer he was courting for a new fund suddenly pulled out, citing a conflict of interest after the Seraphim Group's real estate division made them a better offer. A tech startup he had his eye on for an IPO was suddenly acquired in a private deal financed by a Valeriano-backed venture capital firm. He was being boxed in, outmaneuvered at every turn. It was brilliant, terrifying, and undeniably personal. This wasn't just Niccolo Valeriano flexing his muscle. Ethan could feel Isabella's hand in it. She knew his strategies, his ambitions, his pressure points. She had listened to his business calls for years, had read his reports, had been a silent audience to his grand plans. Now she was using that intimate knowledge against him with devastating precision. The final killing stroke came a month after the news broke. Hayes Capital was insolvent. Facing bankruptcy and a slew of lawsuits from furious investors, Ethan was forced to sell. The only viable offer came from a private equity group he'd never heard of, NSR Holdings. They bought the firm for pennies on the dollar, acquiring his entire portfolio, his client list, everything. He was left with nothing but a mountain of debt and public disgrace. 2 weeks later, he was sitting in a nondescript bar in the financial district, nursing a cheap beer, when a news report came on the television above the bar. A financial news anchor was reporting on a major acquisition. NSR Holdings, the mysterious firm that recently acquired the remnants of Hayes Capital, has been revealed to be a subsidiary of the Seraphim Group. In a statement today, Seraphim's new head of portfolio strategy, Isabella Valeriano Rossi, announced plans to restructure the acquired assets. Ethan stared at the screen, the beer turning to acid in his stomach. She had bought his company. She owned his legacy, his dream, everything he had built. She hadn't just defeated him, she had consumed him. The house of cards had fallen, and she was standing in the rubble, holding the one card that truly mattered, the Queen. The Vegas boardroom was a world away from the quiet, dust-mote-filled studios where Isabella had once painstakingly restored Renaissance paintings. Here the art was in the deal, the canvas was a balance sheet, and the colors were the black of profit and the red of loss. The air hummed with a different kind of energy, not the patient silence of creation, but the charged, kinetic thrill of immense wealth in motion. Isabella felt surprisingly at home. Her initial foray into the family business had been driven by a primal need for survival and a cold thirst for justice. But as the weeks turned into months, something else began to take root. She discovered she had an aptitude for it, a natural instinct for the intricate dance of power and finance. The same meticulous eye that could spot a forged brushstroke could now identify a flaw in a corporate strategy. The same patience that allowed her to spend weeks on a single piece of damaged canvas now enabled her to wait for the perfect moment to make a move in the market. She didn't try to emulate her grandfather's iron-fisted patriarchal style. Instead, she brought her own quiet, analytical approach to the table. She listened more than she spoke, absorbing information from Lena, the CFO, and Marco, the head of security, who became her trusted mentors. They in turn were impressed by her sharp mind and her lack of ego. She wasn't playing at being a boss, she was learning to be a leader. Her first major test came with the acquisition of Hayes Capital. It had been her idea, a move that was both strategically brilliant and deeply personal. While her grandfather would have been content to simply crush Ethan's firm, Isabella saw an opportunity. His portfolio is fundamentally sound, she had argued in the boardroom, her voice calm and steady, betraying none of the emotion swirling inside her. His mistake wasn't his investment strategy, it was his character. The assets are undervalued because of the panic surrounding his name. We can acquire them for a fraction of their worth, absorb them into our own private equity division, and turn a significant profit within 2 quarters. It was a cold, calculated move, and Niccolo had looked at her with a gleam of immense pride in his eyes. This was the Valeriano blood he knew. Now she was in the process of restructuring her former husband's company. She sifted through the files, the business plans, the very documents that represented Ethan's life's work. It was a surreal experience. She saw the ghost of the man she had loved in the margins of his notes, in the ambitious, sometimes reckless projections he had made. She saw his brilliance, but also his fatal flaw, a deep-seated insecurity that drove him to constantly seek external validation. One afternoon, Maya, Ethan's former assistant, whom Isabella had personally insisted on keeping, brought her a file. This was a side project Mr. Hayes was passionate about, Maya said, her loyalty now firmly transferred. A clean energy fund. He believed in it, but he could never get the more conservative investors like Mr. Thorne to back it. Isabella opened the file. The proposal was well-researched, innovative, and surprisingly forward-thinking. It was a glimpse of a better man, a man who could see beyond the next deal. It was the Ethan she had first fallen in love with. A pang of something, not love, but a sad, complex nostalgia, went through her. She made a note. This fund would be her first priority. She would make it successful, not for him, but because it was a sound investment, that it would also serve as a final, quiet testament to her superior judgment was a satisfying bonus. As her belly grew, so did her confidence. Her pregnancy, which Ethan had deemed a complication, became her armor. Walking through the casino floors, her hand resting on her stomach, she was a symbol of the future, of the continuation of the Valeriano dynasty. The staff, from the dealers to the security guards, looked at her with a fierce, protective loyalty. She was one of them. She was carrying the air. But her new life was not without its own challenges. The Valeriano world was filled with sharks who smelled blood in the water. Distant cousins and ambitious executives who had been circling her grandfather for years now saw her as an obstacle. A rival casino owner, a slick corporate raider named Sterling, made a public play to acquire one of their smaller hotel properties, a direct challenge to her new authority. Instead of meeting him with her grandfather's usual aggressive tactics, Isabella requested a face-to-face meeting. They met in a neutral location, a quiet lounge downtown. Sterling was all predatory smiles and condescending charm. "Miss Valeriano Rossi," he began, "I'm sure we can come to a mutually beneficial arrangement. A woman in your condition shouldn't be dealing with such stressful business." Isabella let the insult hang in the air before she responded, her voice soft but laced with steel. "Mr. Sterling, I've reviewed your company's financials. Your debt-to-equity ratio is concerning. You're over-leveraged. This play for our property isn't a power move. It's a desperate attempt to acquire a stable asset to reassure your creditors." Sterling's smile faltered. "So here is my counteroffer," Isabella continued, leaning forward slightly. "You will withdraw your bid publicly by the end of the day. In return, I will not share my analysis of your company's financial instability with the ratings agencies. My grandfather has a very persuasive way with them." She took a sip of her water. "And if you ever condescend to me or my condition again, I will buy your company out from under you and turn your flagship casino into a parking garage. Am I clear?" He stared at her, his face pale. He had come expecting to intimidate a novice and had found himself facing a queen. He nodded curtly, the bravado gone. By the end of the day, his bid was withdrawn. She had won, and she had done it her way. That evening, she stood on her balcony, the city lights a river of diamonds below. She felt the baby kick, a strong, reassuring flutter. She was building a new life, a new kind of empire, not just for herself, but for her child. The pain of Ethan's betrayal had not vanished, but it had been transformed. It was no longer a wound, but a crucible that had forged her into something stronger, something unbreakable. She had been a wife, an accessory, a victim. Now she was Isabella Valeriano, and she was sitting on a different kind of throne, one she was building for herself. The gilded cage was a distant memory. Before her lay a kingdom. The bottom was not a fiery, dramatic crash. It was a slow, grinding descent into a gray, anonymous existence. Ethan Hayes, the man whose name had once been a synonym for success in San Francisco's financial circles, was now just another face in the crowd. He'd lost everything: his company, his reputation, his home, his lover. All that remained was a crushing mountain of debt in the ghost of the man he used to be. He moved into a small, soulless apartment in a part of the city he once would have flown over without a second glance. The sleek, minimalist furniture of his old life was replaced by cheap, functional pieces from IKEA. The bespoke suits were traded for jeans and worn-out shirts. He sold his Aston Martin to cover a fraction of his legal fees and now took the bus, averting his eyes from the glint of luxury cars that passed him by. He was unemployable. His name was toxic. Every door he knocked on was politely but firmly shut in his face. The financial world, a world built on trust and reputation, had excommunicated him. The men who had once slapped him on the back and called him a genius now crossed the street to avoid him. Shame was his constant companion. It was there when he woke up in the morning to the sound of his neighbors' screaming kids, and it was there when he fell into a restless, alcohol-fueled sleep at night. He replayed his final conversation with Isabella over and over in his mind, each word a fresh torment. "A complication I can't afford." How could he have been so callous, so blind? He saw her face everywhere, on the cover of magazines in the supermarket checkout line, on financial news segments playing in the corner of a dingy bar. The media portrayed her as a brilliant, avenging angel, a corporate icon in the making. They lauded her business acumen, her quiet strength, her grace under pressure. They told the story of her victory, which was, by necessity, the story of his defeat. He watched obsessed as she transformed the company he had built. She had taken his passion project, the Clean Energy Fund, and poured resources into it, turning it into the most successful and lauded division of the new portfolio. It was a move so shrewd, so utterly galling, that he could almost admire it. She wasn't just erasing him, she was improving on him, proving that his best ideas could only flourish without him at the helm. The solitude gnawed at him. Chloe was long gone, her social media feed a curated gallery of yacht parties and exotic vacations with a new, more promising billionaire. His old friends had vanished. He was an outcast, a pariah. One day, driven by a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical illness, he went to a place he hadn't been in years, his parents' modest suburban home. They were simple, good people who had never understood his relentless ambition. They had been quietly proud of his success, but deeply unsettled by the man he had become in its pursuit. His mother opened the door, her face etched with a mixture of love and pain. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just hugged him, and for the first time in months, Ethan allowed himself to break. He wept in his mother's arms, the sobs of a broken man who had finally hit the bedrock of his own failure. He started attending therapy, forced by a court mandate related to one of the investor lawsuits. He went in cynical and defensive, but the therapist, a patient, no-nonsense woman, began to chip away at the armor of arrogance he had built around himself. "Why did you need to be so successful, Ethan?" she asked one session. "I wanted to build something," he answered, the old familiar justification, "to make a mark." "Or were you running from something?" she countered. "What were you so afraid of?" The question burrowed deep. He had spent his whole life running, from his humble origins, from the fear of being ordinary, from the quiet terror that, underneath all the ambition and the expensive suits, he was fundamentally not enough. Isabella, with her quiet self-possession and her mysterious, unexamined past, had been a comfort at first. But as his star rose, her stillness began to feel like an anchor. Her pregnancy had been the ultimate threat, a force of nature that would ground him, make him ordinary, tie him to a life of domesticity he equated with failure. He had pushed her away not because she was weak, but because he was terrified of the strength her love demanded of him. He got a job, not on Wall Street, but at a small, non-profit community lending organization that helped fund local businesses. The pay was a joke compared to what he once made in an hour, but for the first time in his life, his work felt meaningful. He was helping people build their dreams, a bakery, a bookstore, a bike shop. He was using his skills not to accumulate wealth, but to create value in his own community. He stopped drinking. He started running, pounding the pavement every morning, the physical exertion a way to exorcise the demons of his past. He was thinner. His face was lined with a new, hard-won humility. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet sobriety. 6 months after losing everything, he was walking home from work when he saw her. She was coming out of a bookstore, heavily pregnant and radiating a serene, powerful beauty. She was laughing at something her companion, an older, well-dressed man, who must have been her grandfather, had said. She looked happy, genuinely, incandescently happy. He ducked into a doorway, his heart hammering against his ribs. He saw her, but she did not see him. And in that moment, the last vestiges of his anger and self-pity dissolved, replaced by a profound and aching sense of regret. He hadn't just lost a fortune. He had lost her. He had thrown away a love that was real for a dream that was hollow. And that was a debt he would spend the rest of his life trying to repay. Not to her, but to himself. The birth of her son, Marco Niccolo Valeriano, was the moment Isabella's world truly realigned. Holding the tiny, perfect infant in her arms, she felt a love so fierce and absolute, it eclipsed everything else. The last traces of her grief for Ethan, the lingering bitterness of his betrayal, finally dissolved. They were irrelevant noise in the face of this beautiful, profound new reality. Her son was not a complication. He was the reason for everything. She embraced her life in Las Vegas, not as a temporary refuge, but as her home. She proved to be a formidable and visionary leader for the Seraphim Group, blending her grandfather's old-school wisdom with her own modern, ethical approach. She expanded the company into new, sustainable ventures, reinvested in the local community, and created a corporate culture that valued loyalty and integrity. She was respected, admired, and, in some circles, feared. But she was no longer just the heiress. She was the architect of her own legacy. She rarely thought of Ethan. When she did, it was with a distant, clinical pity. He was a chapter of her life that was closed, a lesson learned. She had heard through the grapevine that he had lost everything and fallen off the map. She felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it was fleeting. His fate was no longer her concern. A year after Marco's birth, she was in San Francisco for a series of meetings. She had brought her son with her, unable to be away from him for more than a few hours. One afternoon, while her grandfather watched the baby in their hotel suite, she decided to take a walk, a nostalgic impulse leading her toward the park near her old neighborhood. As she sat on a bench watching the leaves fall, a man's voice, quiet and hesitant, spoke her name. Isabella? She looked up. It was Ethan. The change in him was so stark it took her a moment to recognize him. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by a simple jacket and worn jeans. The confident, predatory swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet, almost tentative posture. He was thinner, and his eyes, once so full of arrogant fire, now held a deep, sorrowful humility. He looked broken, but also for the first time real. Her first instinct was a surge of cold fury. The security guard, Leo, who was always discreetly nearby, took a step forward, his hand moving toward his jacket. Isabella gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head, and he stopped. "What do you want, Ethan?" she asked, her voice even and cold. "Nothing," he said quickly, holding up his hands as if to show he was unarmed. "I don't want anything. I saw you, and I had to say something." He took a shaky breath. "I'm sorry, Isabella, for everything. There are no words to describe how sorry I am." She looked at him, searching his face for any sign of the old manipulation, the calculated charm. She found none. All she saw was a man hollowed out by regret. "Sorry doesn't fix what you did," she said, her voice flat. "I know," he whispered, his eyes glistening. "I know it doesn't. I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I was a coward. I was a fool. I threw away the only real thing in my life because I was terrified. I built my entire world on a foundation of ego and fear, and I deserve to watch it all turn to dust." He gestured vaguely back in the direction of the financial district. "You know, for a long time I was angry. I thought you and your grandfather had destroyed me. And you did. You beat me at my own game. You were smarter and stronger and more ruthless than I ever was." A wry, self-deprecating smile touched his lips. "But you didn't destroy me. You saved me." Isabella stared at him, bewildered. "Saved you? By taking everything away, you forced me to look at the man who was left when the money and the power were gone. And I hated him," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm trying to be a better man now. A good man. The kind of man who would have been worthy of you. The kind of father our son deserved." He looked away toward a group of children playing on the swings. "I know I have no right to ask, but is he—" "He's beautiful," Isabella said, the words catching in her throat. "He's happy and healthy and so loved." She saw the flicker of pain and longing in his eyes, and for the first time she felt not anger, but a profound, aching sadness for him, for the life he had willingly forfeited. "I don't want to be in his life," Ethan said, as if reading her mind. "I lost that right. It would only confuse him. I want you to know that I will spend the rest of my life trying to be a man he could have been proud of. From a distance." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, clumsily wrapped package. "This is for him, for his first birthday. Please, you don't have to tell him it's from me." He placed it on the bench between them and took a step back. Isabella looked at the small gift, then back at him. She saw the truth of his words in his eyes. This wasn't a ploy. It wasn't a trick. It was an act of penance. She gave a single, slow nod. "Okay, Ethan." A look of immense, heartbreaking relief washed over his face. "Thank you," he whispered. He turned and walked away without another word, disappearing into the anonymous afternoon crowd. Isabella sat for a long time, the small gift resting beside her. She did not open it. She didn't need to. She knew with a certainty that settled deep in her soul that the debt between them had finally been paid. Not with money, not with revenge, but with this: a quiet admission, a heartfelt apology, an act of silent, selfless love. He had lost his kingdom, but in doing so he had perhaps, finally, found his soul. And she, in defending her own, had built an empire far greater than the one she had inherited. She picked up the small gift and walked back toward her hotel, toward her son, toward the future. Isabella's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't just about the power you're born with, but the power you claim in the face of betrayal. From the depths of heartbreak, she didn't just survive. She built an empire and found a deeper purpose. Ethan's journey from a ruthless tycoon to a man seeking redemption shows that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself. Their story is one of love, loss, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. If you were moved by this story of transformation and justice, please hit the like button, share this video with someone who loves a dramatic tale, and subscribe to our channel for more emotional stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.